the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and I can't tell you how honoured I am to stand before you today virtually in strong support of our government's budget, both as the MLA for New Westminster and as BC's Minister of Education. Our government's budget focuses on people and businesses across BC who are working hard to fight the COVID-19 pandemic and get life back on track. BC is providing more supports per capita for people and businesses than any other province. Our government's budget continues to directly support people and businesses by continuing to fund the BC Recovery Benefit and a range of measures to help businesses adapt and prepare to seize the opportunities that recovery will offer. Our government's budget makes the largest investment in BC's history in mental health and addiction services, including more supports in schools and expanding our response to the overdose crisis. An exciting investment for students across BC, free public transportation for children 12 and under. Now that will save families up to $672 a year per child and give the next generation of transit riders a head start on the many health and wellness benefits that active transportation brings. Our government's budget doubles the number of $10 a day childcare spaces, continues to build and expand centres to create more spaces, and provides 400 more culturally relevant childcare spaces for Indigenous families. And it doubles the wage enhancement for early childhood educators, the workforce behind the workforce. And I'd go further and say that I think our plan really does recognize the diversity of BC families and the different needs that they have in different settings and sectors. In Budget 2021, we will also see record infrastructure investments, creating 85,000 jobs over 3 years, building schools, building hospitals, roads, and more right across the province. You know, ultimately, our government's budget is about helping people now and creating the conditions for a strong economic recovery. And in short, it's all about people. It's about supporting people across the province. And in my constituency of New Westminster, we also see the importance of these investments in access to healthcare, in education, and in affordable childcare. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the projects that I think are particularly important. Royal Columbian Hospital, the oldest hospital in our province, has just started construction, just broke ground on phase 2, which is a 348-bed acute care tower. It's going to expand our acute care space, expand our emergency room space, and it is a lead up to phase 3, where there will be a further expansion of inpatient capacity. And I want to say that Royal Columbian Hospital is such an important part of the fabric of our community in British Columbia. It dates back to 1862. It has a long and storied history as BC's oldest hospital, yet it has now become an important tertiary care centre for the province, and in fact serves 1 in 3 people in British Columbia, providing a very important services. So we see how the investment that our government is making in people rolls out in communities right across the province. And in our government's budget, of course, there's so much good news for K-12 students, families, staff, and communities. And while we talk about education as a sector, really education is all about people. And schools, they're safe havens for many children, where students can access food and mental health supports, where they grow and learn and thrive. And our schools must be places that are welcoming and inclusive for all students. Schools are places where inequities must be addressed, where lessons can change lives, where teachers help shape lives, teachers and mentors help shape lives and build confidence. And I do want to give a big shout out to all of the staff, to the teachers and educational assistants, to clerical workers and administrators, to custodians, maintenance teams, and bus drivers. all those who teach and support our children, who take care of our schools, who lead and keep our schools running smoothly, and who safely transport our kids. I'd like to recognize as well all of the trustees and advocates who spend their own time advocating for education. We all owe you a debt of thanks for supporting schools and children and education throughout the pandemic. And I am proud of all of the work our government is doing, making phenomenal progress at building new schools, making schools safer with seismic upgrades, expanding mental health supports for students and staff, increasing affordable childcare, and introducing new anti-racism initiatives as we all work together to end systemic racism. These important investments are moving forward despite the COVID-19 pandemic, which has altered this school year in ways we really couldn't have imagined just over a year ago. We know the sacrifices everyone is making this year will have long-term positive impacts for students on their learning because we were able to keep schools open and safe, and just as important, on their mental health and wellness. And in a year of so much uncertainty, I know for many students and families, school was one of their only constants, their only sense of normalcy. And I am very, very grateful and proud of the work everyone has done across our education system to mitigate the impact of COVID on our children. In addition to historic high investments in school operating and capital funding, as reflected in our government's budget, we have also supplied schools and districts with significant one-time funding to keep schools open and safe this school year. A total of $288 million continues to support school safety plans through the pandemic. And all school districts are using their COVID restart funding to hire additional staff, to make improvements to ventilation, to support remote learning, and to increase cleaning protocols. And we have several examples of these investments that aren't just short-term. They're investments, in fact, that will benefit schools and the education system for many years to come. We will continue to work with public health officials as they review what health and safety measures will be necessary in September. And while we expect that students will be learning in more normal conditions in the fall as a result of the government's vaccine rollout, we will follow the advice of our public health officials and provide resources to school districts as needed. Now, as we continue to support school communities, Budget 2021 ensures our education system will have the highest ever school operating and capital funding. K-12 education is receiving record levels of funding in this budget, with a 6% increase over last year, and which represents a 25% increase since 2016. And many of you know, I think we know that education is it's all about people, but actually 90% of the costs in education are directly about people. There are teachers, our education assistants, support staff, and administrators. And this budget, I am proud to say, fully funds negotiated labor costs for teachers and support staff with an investment of $662 million in funding. Our government is also providing school districts with an additional $424 million to recognize enrollment growth. And I am excited to tell you that our government's budget includes funding boosts to improve access to virtual mental health programs and services in schools, to expand early learning and on-site school childcare opportunities, and for us to develop a framework to address racism and reconciliation. Throughout this pandemic, we have worked closely with our partners across the K-12 education system to do everything possible to maintain safe schools for students and staff. And I'm deeply grateful for the collective effort of students, educators, school staff, and parents who showed their trust in our work by sending the vast majority of their children to school each day to learn in classrooms. We know for many reasons that kids learn best in the classroom with their peers, with the professional guidance of teachers, and where they have access to the additional important supports, such as meal programs, mental health supports, access to technology, and where they have a chance to be with their friends and be kids. As we continue our vaccine rollout in communities throughout BC, our government's budget offers record high investments in school operating and capital funding at a time when students and staff are looking to us for steady leadership and increasing financial stability. So let's just look at the numbers. Our government's budget invests $21.5 billion over 3 years to deliver BC's K-12 education. Compared to budget 2017, our government is investing nearly $3.4 billion more in the delivery of education in BC with this budget. Our government's budget includes more than $1.2 billion in additional operating funds in BC schools over the next 3 years. It includes support for the growing number of special needs students as well. English and French language learners and Indigenous learners in our schools also will receive additional funding. In 2021, we're investing $437 million more annually to deliver K-12 education in BC for a total of $7.1 billion. That's $1.4 billion or 25% more than the 2016-2017 budget. And it's a 6% increase over last year. That is the largest year-over-year increase in recent history and something that our government is justifiably very proud of. And of course, while we plan for the future, we are very mindful of what's happening in our schools now. We know that the pandemic is taking a toll on the mental health of students and staff, and we must be prepared to support them. Our government's budget adds $6 million to further support critical student mental health initiatives in our schools. And that's on top of the nearly $13.9 million investment in partnership with the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions to help build capacity in school districts and make mental health and wellness front and center for students, parents, and educators. As part of our government's broader work to build mental health supports, $97 million in total to build a network of mental health supports for youth that includes new Foundry centers that provide young people health and wellness resources in their communities. And this investment will also support the creation of 15 new integrated child and youth teams in schools around BC. In addition, our mental health in schools strategy embeds mental health and substance use programs and services for students throughout the education system and expands on A Pathway to Hope, our government's strategy to transform mental health and substance use care for children and young people. Teachers and education staff have done a tremendous job of keeping kids learning through the pandemic and have gone above and beyond this year in keeping our schools safe. Navigating the ongoing pandemic is a challenge for all British Columbians, and we know that there have been impacts on people's mental health. Our province also offers a range of supports that all education staff can access to help with anxiety, stress, and worry. This includes access to free phone-based support with a counselor through the BC COVID-19 Mental Health Network. Or they can access free remote access to the Bounce Back program, which offers tools to support mental wellness. And the 310 mental health support number also offers free emotional support, information, and resources 24 hours a day. The mental health and wellness of everyone in our school communities is supported by our government's budget. Turning now to speaking about the environments and the infrastructure in which our children learn, we know that investment in infrastructure is critically important to support student staff and safety. And we continue to make historic investments in schools so that communities and families have the new schools they need. They have upgraded schools so their children are safe in the event of an earthquake, and expanded schools in fast-growing cities, towns, and neighborhoods. We understand that modern learning environments will help prepare BC students for the jobs of tomorrow in the dynamic classrooms of today. We are continuing to make record investments in school facilities with almost $3.1 billion in provincial funding budgeted over the next 3 years for new and expanded schools, to seismically upgrade schools, for maintenance, playgrounds, and property purchases to invest in the future development of our school system. And again, if we just look at the numbers on this, if we compare to budget 2016, budget 2021 invests nearly $1.6 billion additional dollars in maintaining, improving, and expanding BC's school facilities. Building on investments announced in recent years, our budget includes an additional $235 million over 3 years for accelerating seismic upgrades. An additional $100 million for school site acquisitions in fast-growing areas of our province. $177 million more for expansion projects that address enrollment growth and reduce portable use. In addition, our budget includes new funding to support facility safety and improvements, including projects that address potential COVID-19 related health and safety issues, including increases next year for a number of capital programs. Our annual facilities grant, and that's an additional $5 million to address unanticipated and emergent facility related needs. An additional $6 million into our school enhancement program to improve the safety, condition, and functionality of existing schools, and an additional $4 million into our building envelope program. You know, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to take a minute to speak particularly about one of the fastest, or perhaps the fastest growing community in our province, and that is Surrey, where we have been especially aggressive because we believe that every child in BC deserves the best possible learning environment. And so we have approved nearly $450 million in new schools, expansions, seismic upgrades, and land purchases for future schools in Surrey. And these investments are helping nearly 9,600 students in Surrey move from portables into classrooms as they did between 2018 and 2025. Now, that's the equivalent of almost 385 portables. And listen, I know there's no question we're playing catch up after 16 years of cuts and underfunding by the old government. But this past September, for the first time in recent memory, Surrey did not have to purchase new portables for students. And there is no plan to purchase portables for this upcoming year. Our investments in Surrey are working, and they will save the district millions in portable costs. And this is the difference here. We are moving 3 times faster on school projects in Surrey than the old government. Now, when it comes to sustainable investments, students are looking for us to lead now and support their futures. Our investments will become their legacy. We must be thoughtful in how we build and grow. With Clean BC, we are reducing pollution by powering our future in K-12 education, by increasing the carbon neutral capital program by $11.6 million over the next 3 years, as well as investing $4 million extra to support the acquisition of the purchase of electric buses under the bus acquisition program. And I want to talk about another really, really important element of education, because, you know, it's not just all about books and book learning. And as you know, we all know, school is so much more than books. It's also a place where children come to play and to learn through play. And we know that play is a critical component for student wellness as well. And to relieve the burden of parents having to fundraise, our government's budget doubles the funding next year for safe, modern, accessible playgrounds in this fiscal year. Now, we've already invested $15 million to date through the Playground Equipment Program, so that more than 35,000 children will be able to enjoy new playgrounds at 141 schools throughout BC. And I can't tell you actually how thrilled I am that we are continuing this important investment for BC students and communities in our government's budget with an additional $20 million over the next 3 years. And I have seen the faces on children as they are playing in these fully accessible playgrounds, and that is just a sight to behold. And of course, we know as well that there is nothing more important than ensuring every child is supported to reach their full potential, and our government is committed to removing barriers that stand in their way. School districts will receive additional dollars for special needs students in the upcoming year. An estimated $664.4 million in supplemental funding is allocated in our government's budget, an increase of $200 million or 43% since the 2016-2017 school year. And we know that that is welcome news for families whose children need learning supports. And when it comes, Mr. Speaker, to Indigenous peoples and our very serious and true and lasting commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, of course, I want to note that, again, that BC was the first province to pass legislation to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And in education, that means that for the first time, the new K-12 curriculum ensures Indigenous knowledge and perspectives are woven across all grades and areas of learning. 18 Indigenous languages have also been approved to be taught in BC schools, and more are in development. To support Indigenous learners in the 2021-22 school year, targeted funding is estimated at $95.2 million, an increase of $25.5 million or over 36% since the 2016-2017 school year. And of the one-time COVID-related funds this past year, we provided $8.2 million to the First Nations Education Steering Committee for Indigenous students living on reserve and attending public school. The COVID-specific funding supported pandemic-related challenges in First Nations community, such as addressing learning loss and student health, technology for remote learning, education and mental health support, as well as adapting classroom spaces and enhanced cleaning. As part of our government's commitment to support anti-racism and reconciliation efforts, our government's budget will include an additional $1.3 million to continue our work to develop a framework to address racism and reconciliation. And this follows and will allow us to continue very important work started last summer when we hosted a community roundtable on anti-racism in education. And we brought together leaders, community leaders from a wide range of groups to provide input into the development of a multi-year K-12 anti-racism action plan, and to review how we can strengthen our provincial curriculum to include new teachings, perspectives, and history. And we plan to launch the K-12 Anti-Racism Action Plan later this year. And I'm looking very much forward to working closely with BC's first parliamentary secretary responsible for anti-racism. And finally, Mr. Speaker, as we look to the future, bringing childcare and education together is such an important step to support government's long-term plan to create a universal, inclusive, early care and learning system. And that system will better support children and families and inspire lifelong learning. Our ministry will be expanding the Seamless Day pilot from 4 locations to 24, which will benefit families in accessing more childcare on school grounds and will integrate school-age childcare programs into kindergarten and grade 1 classrooms. This is all about making life better for families, easier for families, and improving the services that we provide to children. These steps will support the work ahead as the province continues to engage with partners from the childcare and education sector, including Indigenous-led childcare providers, to continue to build an inclusive, early learning, early care and learning system to move British Columbia even further along the path to universal childcare. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the sum of what we've put forward, and not just the numbers, but the intent behind the numbers, I think what our government's budget says is that to British Columbians who are looking for what they can expect as we move out of the pandemic and into the months ahead, we're answering the call for steady, supportive, and compassionate leadership that puts people first. Budget 2021, our government's budget is about helping people now and creating the conditions for a strong economic recovery. It's about making our healthcare better, creating new opportunities for people and for families. It's about helping BC businesses hire and grow. It's about investing in infrastructure, including schools, to create jobs and to build up our communities. And you know, I think about this every day. I think about how kids and families are experiencing our education system. And I think that what kids and families want to know is that we care about them, that we have their backs. And I think the investments that we're making in schools and education in this budget show that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to our government's 2021-2022 budget. It is clear that the priorities of our government, putting people first, building up our public services, our green economy, our capacity for communities to be resilient and build on strong foundations. There are many, many elements of this budget that support those endeavors as we come out of what has been a life-altering experience in terms of dealing with the global pandemic. This budget, I know, is going to help every British Columbian. It's going to help our education system. It's going to help us rebuild our communities. So thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and I will end my comments there.